Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started in just a minute. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for what is our last webinar of Victim Rights Month. I know that so many of you who are with us today in the audience have been with us throughout the entire month, and so thank you for being here and for showing up throughout all of April. And to anyone who is joining us for the first time today, welcome. We really appreciate all of you being here. My name is Brenna Chase. I am the I am the Deputy Chief of Staff at MOVA. My position recently changed. I'm getting used to that. My pronouns are she, her. And before we get started today, I just want to run through some brief Zoom logistics for our audience members. First and foremost, this is a Zoom webinar, which means that as audience members, you can't be seen or heard, but you should be able to see the presentation that's on the screen, as well as our ASL interpreters and our presenters here with us today. If you have questions during today's session, and we hope that you do, we encourage questions. Please use that Q&A function found at the bottom of the screen to ask your questions. We'll pause throughout today's session to answer those, and then there will be another formal opportunity at the end of the presentation as well for questions. We also have ASL interpreters with us today and closed captioners. If you want to use those closed captions, you can go down to the bottom of the screen. There is a little icon called closed caption. If you click the arrow next to that and select show subtitle, you should be able to view those captions. And if at any point today you're having issues with tech or with viewing the ASL interpreters or closed captions, you can use the chat function and message all panelists. We have Charlotte with us today who will be here to assist anyone with tech issues. All right, and with that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's session and our panelists who are with us today. We're really grateful to be closing this month with today's session titled Survivors of High-Profile Tragedies and the Media, Filling a Critical Gap in Support. We're thrilled to have Dave, Nicole, and Jason with us today to talk through a more in-depth overview of what Survivors Say is. Today's presentation will draw attention to the critical gap in services for media support for survivors. It will address solutions in the gap and acknowledging the support Survivors Say can offer. We'll have the privilege of hearing from Jason, who is a survivor, who will speak to the impact the media has on survivors and their families. And then we'll hear from Nicole as well, who has worked as a provider and an advocate and has experience in supporting survivors and navigating the challenges that come with the press and media. And then we'll close out with a closer look at what supporting survivors and families looks like at Survivors Say. And now I want to introduce each one of our panelists who is with us today. We're really lucky to have them here. Dave Guarino founded Survivors Say in 2021 after identifying a critical gap in services to survivors and their families, too often leaving them with little support to manage intense media coverage in the aftermath of high-profile tragedy. Since then, he has grown Survivors Say to include more than 40 volunteers across the country and recruited a highly skilled and diverse board of directors to increase its reach and potential impact. We also have Nicole Bresnahan with us today. Nicole is a former Massachusetts victim witness advocate and has held many roles within the victim advocacy community. She is a passionate advocate for survivors and their families. She initially joined Survivors Say as a volunteer after seeing how media attention following a tragedy, whether it be immediately or years after, is a common occurrence for survivors and families, yet the experience remains overlooked. And finally, we're really happy to have Jason LeRocque with us here today. Jason and his family are survivors of mass violence. Jason's wife, Rhonda, was among the 60 killed in the Las Vegas Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting in 2017. He and their daughter, Allie, live in Tewksbury and have spoken publicly about the support of family and faith as they manage the ongoing impacts of their trauma and loss. Survivor Say was honored to support Jason and his family in the immediate aftermath of Rhonda's death, and Jason has been a supporter of its mission in the years since. We're really thankful to all of our panelists for being here with us today. Again, I encourage those of you in our audience to use that Q&A function to ask questions. You can use the chat to offer reflections or comments. We're really hoping for this to be a productive conversation, and in order for that to happen, we need your participation. So don't be shy. And with that, Dave, I will kick it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Brenna. Thank you to MOVA and your team, to Liam Lowney for all of his support and for all the work that you all do, and for having us here to close out the amazing webinars and events you've been doing around Victims' Rights Month. We're honored to be a part of it. And thanks to everybody who's here. I hope you take seriously what Brenna said at the start, and we make this a conversation and a discussion. We welcome your questions, we welcome your feedback, and we welcome your thoughts throughout this. Jason and Nicole, I'm so grateful that you're able to join us. Jason, for agreeing to tell your story and sharing it with us, for making sure that everything we do is centered around the experiences of survivors, elevating their voices, and ensuring that, in particular to this topic, all of our communications are survivor-centered and trauma-informed. And Nicole, thank you for your years of advocacy and for your partnership on this work and all the countless families that you've served. As Brenna said, I'm Dave Guarino. I'm the founder and president of Survivor Say. I've been in and around media all of my career, first as a newspaper reporter where I covered crime and violence and criminal justice issues for a number of years. In addition to other beats I worked on, I was a communications director for the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, so worked closely with law enforcement there, and the Speaker of the House at Massachusetts State House. In my other day job, I lead a strategic communications firm where we work with a lot of nonprofits and organizations around public policy. I'm honored to be leading this organization that is a nonprofit. We're fully volunteer led and run. So Stephanie, you can go to the next slide. Sorry, one more. That was my mistake. So skip the title slide. So I want to take a few minutes to broadly frame the issue that we want to talk about today, and then step back so we can hear from Jason and Nicole, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the detail of how we do the work and ask for your partnership going forward. I also, as I said, want to save plenty of time for questions and discussion. So please include those. We've added some pauses along the way where Brenna can interrupt and let us know if you have any questions. Every day there's tragedies of all sizes that happen in every corner of the planet, creating survivors among those who've lived through it, their loved ones, their communities, and the public. As you know, this group particularly knows, the trauma created by these moments is acute, it's severe, and it never fully goes away. Into this highly charged moment, the worst moments of most people's lives, walks the media. And the media is drawn to tragedies, to crises, like the news businesses, like television, movies, books, podcasts. It's driven by stories of tragedy. And so whatever tragedy, the media is there, often in large numbers, to report about, to ask about, and if we're being honest, too often to exploit these painful moments to keep people reading, watching, clicking, and sharing their news reports. Sometimes the public interest lasts a few minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes days, weeks, months, or years, and it's relentless. When it comes, survivors and their families are least prepared for it, and it's typically when they least want it. The media will go to great lengths to do its job, to try to contact survivors at their homes, on their phones, on email, and now predominantly on social media. And they are, to say the least, dogged in what they do, trying to reach survivors, family members, really anyone who can talk about the tragedy that they're covering. The impact can be profound, can be profoundly negative for the families and survivors. There's a loss of control, a loss of safety, a feeling of loss of safety, security, and privacy at the worst possible moment. Reporters, particularly when moving quickly, can also get things wrong and talk to the wrong people in the eyes of many of the survivors and families we've worked with in their quest to speak to anyone who can tell the story. In these moments, survivors tend to do one of two or three things. They speak to the media and they tell their stories with all the impact and trauma that can bring. Sometimes they're pleased with the outcome, sometimes not so much. When they can also turn to someone to help them, a member of the family, a trusted friend, an attorney, a religious leader, a faith leader, who can manage the media, outreach, arrange interviews if they want to make statements on behalf of the family. They can get support from the government or the many community-based organizations who do amazing work on behalf of survivors. Or a lot of times they just try to ignore the calls and tune out the media altogether. Which is very difficult to do, as you might imagine. Next slide, please. So that's the gap that, sorry, I think one more, it's a tiered slide. I didn't realize that. Thank you. So that's the gap we're trying to fill. We've been offering our services at no cost to families for many years, 3 years officially, as survivors say. And as you'll hear in our story with Jason, before that and in an unofficial capacity, we've worked with survivors and their families throughout Massachusetts, New England, and around the country. As Brenna said, we have more than 40 volunteers now, a diverse board, and a commitment to increase our ability to provide the service to anyone who needs it. We're working to secure support needed to allow us to bring on staff and ensure that we're available and can mobilize immediately, because as we said, the media doesn't wait for survivors to be organized. And we're working to build partnerships so that when tragedy occurs, we're introduced to survivors and their families through trusted referral sources. And we'll get into why that's important in a bit. And one more thing about our mission as we start, beyond the gap that we're hoping to fill, we wake up every morning believing that this work can change the world for future survivors and their families. We start with our mission that every survivor should have a say in if, when, and how their story is told. From there, we believe survivors can and should be able to live in a world where they don't feel gutted by the media, where they can have privacy if they want it, and they can feel safe, supported, and heard if they choose to tell their stories. We believe the media can and should be allowed to do its job and balance the rights, wishes, and goals of survivors. We believe access to the media, access to support, and access to services like ours shouldn't depend on the zip code, shouldn't depend on where you live. And we're determined to ensure that those who are too often most impacted by violence that leads our newscasts also have the most support in helping them manage it. And we believe we can fundamentally change the paradigm in how the media, survivors, and families interact here and around the globe. So it's a lot, and we're glad to be able to do it. But let me pause there, and before we go too deep into how we do it, and bring on Jason and Nicole, because their experiences are critical to this discussion. Next slide, and Brenna, if there's any questions yet, now might be a good time to start.
None yet.
Okay, get your questions ready, people. So as Brenna said, I really want to start with Jason because, as we've said, all of our actions are survivor-focused, survivor-informed, and where we can, make them survivor-led. As an organization, we've made sure to have survivors in leadership positions. We work hard to make sure that we get survivor feedback on all of our actions and that the stories we tell are told through informed and ongoing consent from the survivors we've supported. As I said, we're glad to have Jason with us, and he's agreed to talk about his survivor story and the impact the media on survivors and their families. We're going to do this Q&A style, and Um, just to be clear, we gave Jason the questions in advance, which is a practice that we hope the media can mirror when it's covering stories and talking to survivors. So Jason, thanks again. Just to start with some basics, tell us about yourself, where you live, your family, and what you do for a living.
Sure. I'm 48 years old. I've lived in Tewksbury. I've lived here my entire life. So been local to New England in this particular town for my whole life. I have my daughter now is 13, Aaliyah, or Allie, we call her for short. And I do construction for a living, and I've done it since I was in my early teens. My family's been in construction, so I was around it. I would do it in the summers when I was growing up, and I've been doing it for 30 plus years. I enjoy it. I enjoy construction overall. Love traveling, love family. But yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Yeah, that's great. And tell us about Rhonda, how you met, what drew you together, what were her passions, and what did you love to do together?
We met through our faith. We're both Jehovah's Witnesses. So at the Kingdom Hall that I attended, she moved into her grandmother's place in Lowell. She started to attend the Kingdom Hall I was at. So from the very first meeting we were at, we kind of caught eyes, and we admitted later, like we just were connected. Like we saw something there from each other. But we were just good friends for the first year and a half or so. We did a ton together, got closer. And then eventually we started dating, and we got married early. We were 20 years old when we got married. So a lot of people were skeptical about that. But 21 years later was everything happened. We had a great marriage. Everything worked great. But she had a passion for cooking. She had a passion for family, for kids. That's what we didn't have. We weren't planning to have kids initially, but her passion for kids eventually overtook us to have our daughter Aaliyah, and she was the greatest mom. She had a love of life, and people, the impact she had on people was, I knew it, but you saw it after everything happened. Like so many, like just countless people, her work, her family, everybody, just how much people were devastated by not having her around. She just had a huge impact on everybody she touched.
Yeah, I definitely heard that. One of the things that I know you did together was to help people with your skills and passion, and did some rebuilding of homes after natural disasters in Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, and even Jamaica. What an incredible thing, first of all, but tell us a bit about what you did there and why you did it.
Again, I enjoy construction, but we wanted to help. At the time we didn't have our daughter, so we had flexible schedules. So we wanted to help, and there's opportunities that came up that we could help people that were devastated by different natural disasters. So we repaired roofs, we repaired water damage in people's homes after Katrina. But so I had the background in construction. Rhonda didn't, but she still shared in it with me. And, at first she would get on the roof and be scared, but then by the end she was running around the roof. She was helping wherever she could. And some of those experiences were really the best experiences that we had. We just enjoying being together, but also helping people and just seeing how we could impact people's lives that went through a tough time.
Yeah. What a great impact. And you started to a little bit, but tell us about your daughter together, Allie.
Yeah, like I said, I personally never wanted kids early on, but Rhonda always loved children. And obviously we decided to have Allie, and she's been a blessing to us. I mean, she's a little version of her mother. She was 6 when everything happened. But Allie's just a sweetheart. She loves life. She loves people. She literally, I see Rhonda through her because Rhonda was the same way. She always wanted to do for others what she could do, and that's Allie. She wants to make everybody happy by what she does. But she's 13 now, 7th grade. Has her share of challenges because of everything that's gone on, but she's still just a little image of Rhonda.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we know, because the world knows, what happened on October 1st, 2017, and I'll say at the outset that you suggested when we were preparing this that we use that photo that folks can see there of you and Rhonda and Allie on that day, hours before tragedy struck. We're going to skip over the events of that night and move ahead to the aftermath and the meaty discussion we're having today, which is obviously just one facet of all the trauma that you and your family and loved ones have been forced into at that moment. But tell us, did you see or hear from any media while you were in Las Vegas, sorry, and before you came home to Massachusetts?
Yeah, I would get multiple. I didn't answer calls I didn't recognize at the time because I was still in a blur and so much going on. But
Yeah.
I got many messages from some of the bigger news agencies. That just left messages looking to see if I wanted to do an interview of some kind. So yeah, many news agencies did reach out to me that I just kind of ignored at the time. But I'd have multiple messages on my phone each day.
Right. Do you know, or do you have a guess as to how they tracked you down so quickly?
Most of them were through my work cell phone, so I assume they must have been able to track my number through my business, my work that I worked for. I know my boss was reached out to by many people too, so I think it has to have been through my construction company that I worked for.
Yeah. And I know you said this wasn't on the list of questions, but you'd said to me since then that you weren't very active on social media, so you weren't getting a lot of outreach through that.
No, not at all, because I wasn't on Facebook at the time. I did a little Instagram, but nothing came through social media because I wasn't a big social media guy.
Yeah. And if you're comfortable, tell us what, if anything you did in response to those calls, and what was your reaction to getting those calls in that moment?
I mostly ignored them at the time. I had no interest in getting anything out at that time. I was just more focused on how my life is changing and how I'm going to take care of my daughter and all the dynamics of all that would happen. So I just mostly ignored it, and I guess I just ignored it basically.
Yeah. I know that Rhonda's mother and some others did a few interviews about this time. They were back here in Massachusetts before you and Allie came home with Rhonda. Do you know why they decided to do those interviews? And if you remember, were they pleased with how they went at the time?
Yeah, her mother she's more that type. She wanted to be in the media. She wanted to express, her love for her daughter and everything about Rhonda. So she wanted that. It made me uncomfortable, to be honest, because you never know how things are going to get portrayed. But
right,
that's what she wanted to do. She was comfortable with it, and she did good. I think she was happy. I was avoiding the media. I didn't watch any news. I literally didn't watch it for months after it happened. But she wanted to do that, and as far as I know, everything came out okay. But she was approached, and she would always answer. She was the type that if she got a call, she wanted to proceed with it.
Right. And that's something we often see, with the survivors and families we work with. There's we're all different, and we all want to do things differently. So I know this was about the time that we were introduced to each other, and I was introduced to your family. It was a couple of days before you came home to Massachusetts. And for the edification of the folks watching, we were referred into the family through a coworker of Rhonda's and the Attorney General at the time, who knew about the services that we offered, and in my discussions, including with Liam Lowney at the time, about creating a nonprofit of this sort. And the AG's office and their victim witness team arranged a call with some of your family, your work colleagues, Rhonda's colleagues, myself, and a few others. And from there on, I worked closely with Ken and Gerard, your family and friends, on your behalf to manage the media inquiries and as they plan the services. And the overriding goals of our work was really what you said there, Jason, which was to give you and Allie as much privacy as possible to mourn and prepare to honor Rhonda at the services, be with family. But if you remember, can you tell us, or what you think now is sort of why was that privacy so important to you in that moment?
I am a private person. I had no interest in being in the middle of the media, just my daughter, my focus was me and my daughter and how to navigate things moving forward. So I had no interest in getting involved with anything with the media. And a lot of times some of the topics were on gun control and all those things, which like at that point, I just had no interest in getting into that stuff. My life was changing upside down, and I just needed to focus on that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and you're right that's a lot of these interviews probably, you know, would have gone there. That's where the conversation naturally turns in moments like these, beyond the condolences and memories. As the memorial service approached, I think it ended up being a few weeks after the shooting. You and your family decided to make a statement to the media. In your words, it was read by Ken, your family friend, and I want to share the beautiful words you used about Rhonda. At the time, you said people who had the privilege to know Rhonda would only describe her as the happiest, most caring, sweet, and self-sacrificing person you would ever know. That was the quote that appeared worldwide in the days through her services. Why did you decide to make that statement, and what were you hoping to convey to people through the media at the time?
I guess first and foremost would be just to express who Rhonda was and be able to, you know, get that side out. I did ultimately always want to have some sort of a statement out there, especially locally. We were the only family affected by what happened locally here. But I wanted to get who Rhonda was, just my side, just to emphasize what an incredible person she was. But also, you know, some of the stories that were out there, they did twist some of the stuff that it was small things, but I wanted to get the true side of what I went through, what we went through, and just to get my true statement out there as opposed to what the hearsay that was out there. But also to thank everybody. We had, as tragic as it was, the outpouring of support and so many different avenues locally, you know, whatever. There was so many that I wanted to try to be able to have the opportunity to thank all those that offered their services to help us in such a tragic time. So I think those three key things: to express who Rhonda was, to give my side of the story, and to thank all the people that helped. I wanted to get that out there.
Yep. No, that's a good point too, about your desire to correct some of the things that were out there, and it's always interesting watching this is that as soon as the family is able to do that, if they're willing, the narrative can change with it. So that's important to note. A few weeks later, you did opt to do an interview with the Las Vegas Review-Journal newspaper, and you and Allie spoke about Rhonda, family, and faith primarily. Tell us, why you decided to do that as well. And looking back, are you glad that you did that interview?
Yeah, it was a topic. It wasn't a topic about gun control. It wasn't a topic about the shooting per se. It was a topic on the impact that it has on families, like losing your wife, losing a situation like that. So it was a topic that just touched me. I wanted to be able to express how this has impacted me and Allie. And it drew me to want to at least take that interview. And so, yeah, I was happy I did it. And just the topic was what struck me. Yeah.
Which says something to, my opinion about the media, right? Is they can, if they follow certain rules and certain obvious things, which is, somebody like Jason might be reluctant to talk, but he might be more willing if you agree it's not going to be about all these topics, but we're going to focus it here. And that's a lesson we've taken with us and utilized in a lot of our work. I'm sure you sort of moving beyond that. I'm sure, just in the interest of time. So you see families and tragedies unfolding all the time. We've talked about this, but what would you say to families who find themselves in this kind of crisis and tragedy, and those who are supporting them, who are in this audience? What would you say to them, particularly as it relates to the media?
I think you just have to do what you're comfortable with. Your family is most important at that time, and like we said, everyone's different. Some people want to be out there, some people don't. So you do what you're comfortable with. I'm grateful for what you had set up, because like I've said to you even before, when you asked me to do this, I'm like, I wasn't negatively impacted by the media because of what you guys had set up. Because yes, I got some phone calls, but I was not bombarded. Everything went through you. You would reach out to me and say, hey, do you want to do this interview? So I wasn't bombarded. So I don't have a negative view of the media because of what you guys did. But if people don't like that, then I think it's got to be a tough situation to be in. So it's nice to have a point of contact like you to take that away during such a tragic time period.
No, thank you for saying that. And before we open up to questions and then talk to Nicole a little bit, thank you again for being willing to share your story, Jason. We're incredibly grateful and humbled by your continued support. Is there anything else that you'd like to share, or anything that we might have missed in these questions?
I don't think so. Just what I just said. I just want to emphasize, like, literally because of what you set up, you and my family helped set up, I was protected from the media. So I do see a valuable side, because when you're going through what we were going through at the time, like, nobody needs to be bombarded with questions of media when they don't want to have it. So just having that shield in place, I look back, I'm grateful for it. Like I said, I don't have a negative view because of what you guys set up. I hope never want to go through something like this again, but I can imagine if you don't have that shield, how it can be an extra stressor throughout everything else you're going through. So just appreciate what you did.
Great. Well, thank you. Brenna, before we move on to Nicole, anything that you'd like to jump in on, or any questions?
Not seeing any questions yet. One more plug to get those in if you have them. I just want to say, Jason, thank you for sharing Rhonda with us today. And thank you for being a part of today's session. We really appreciate you sharing your experience. And if no one has a follow-up question, I guess I have one. And sorry, Dave, if you were planning to get to this toward the end. Jason, does the media continue to try and get in touch with you or your family? And if so, do you continue to use Dave and his team for support? And I guess follow up to that for you, Dave, does Survivor Say provide long-term support?
I've been reached out through other shootings that came up. I would occasionally get reached out to about seeing if I wanted to, again, gun control, mostly those types of topics that would come up, that I would just decline. No, for a while, I think we had a phone number, or we had an email or something set up that would go through Dave, that he would talk to me, but we haven't had to use that in the last few years by any means. But Dave's always been there. He's been, I've reached out to him for a couple other things along the way. So he's been still a support.
Yeah. And thank you, Jason. And to your question to me, Brenna, we're there for as long as the families need us. We find, what Jason has faced is what happens, depending on what has occurred. You'll get follow-up calls from folks in terms of, other tragedies that are similar. Obviously, mass violence has only escalated. And so, not often, because with Jason in particular, because he has been, pretty private. It happens more with the folks who put themselves out there more, then they're likely to continue to get calls. But we are with families as long as they need us. And a lot of times the other thing that families face is around anniversaries of things, and that that can be unexpected sometimes too. And then the last thing I'll say is, a lot of times there are documentary crews, filmmakers, and others who want to do stories, and so they get some outreach around that stuff as well. So we're there for as long as families need us.
Thank you. And we did have a question come in while you both were answering that. What advice do you have for families or survivors who want media involved?
You want me to take a stab at that, Jason, or you have any thoughts at the outset?
No, you can go.
Yeah, I mean, there are, right? And to Jason's point, you know, with Rhonda's family members, they were eager to be out there and to talk to the media. The police tend to notify the public after the family's been informed in a case like this. And so, Rhonda's name, her age, and her hometown were public information at that point. And so the media will be reporting on that. And as Jason was still in Las Vegas at the time, but the media shows up and they show up at your house. They can quickly find your address. And so for families that do want to speak to it, there's an opportunity. There's almost endless opportunities. And so in cases like this, there isn't a shortage of media that's willing to speak with you, to make themselves available, to broadcast and print your your comments. We have lots of advice on how folks should approach that, because as Jason mentioned, a lot of times they will be interested in your loved one, and they will want quotes about their life and their impact, and talk to you about your loss, of course. But then they'll quickly move on to other topics, and you need to be prepared to either set the ground rules or not answer them, or answer them. And sometimes that's a surprise. One of the things that I want to spend some time talking about later is, what one of the things we do is help families that want to tell their story, but the media hasn't been terribly interested, right? And that happens often. You turn on the news every night and there's 10 seconds on a shooting in a neighborhood in Boston or somewhere else. And they often don't even go and try to speak to the family or try to tell the story of the loved one. So we're there too for those families who want to bring light to stories that that the media aren't cover or haven't covered.
Thank you, Dave. We have another question that came in for Jason. Jason, you talked about your daughter, Allie. What advice do you have for survivors of tragedy going through this with a child? How do you help protect the child through this process?
It's a good question. It's just everything you do, you protect her. I don't know. Yeah, I fortunately she wasn't ever bombarded. The town was great. Everybody kind of protected her in school overall. But yeah, that's when something like this happens, your whole focus, your whole world is to protect her. So I just do whatever I can to protect her and shield her, especially from the news. Like I had to be careful. I didn't want her to watch the news because, she was 6 at the time, especially. So, and even up until this day, still trying to protect, because she can search anything if she wants to and see stuff about the shooting, and just trying. I've done my best to shield her from that part. When she gets older, we can get into more things, but I just do my best to shield her from that type of stuff.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jason. I'm not seeing any others, but we encourage folks to keep them coming.
That's great. That's great. Stephanie, I think we're going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to thank again and throw it over to my colleague, Nicole, who's brings so much to our conversations on this topic, and I've been lucky to work with for a couple of years now, and she will take it from here. Nicole.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us today, Jason. Thank you, Dave. So I'm Nicole Bresnahan. I'm going to go over a little bit of my background. I was a victim witness advocate at VWA for about 4.5 years, give or take. I started in 2017. I worked at a prosecution office, and I was first assigned to a pretty busy district court. Eventually, I moved on to Superior Court in a specialized unit that prosecuted a lot of armed robberies, armed assaults, breaking and enterings, as examples. Plenty of stranger on stranger crime, but that wasn't always the case. This is the unit I was in when I ended up working with a family that was caught in the middle of a pretty isolating and pretty isolating media frenzy, and that was how I was connected with Dave. So I will go over that briefly in just a moment. So eventually I transitioned to a different unit where I worked with high-risk youth and trafficking survivors until I left the office in 2021. I continued my work with youth, and I volunteered with Survivors Say and eventually became a board member this year. So my time as a VWA, thankfully, I worked in an office that always offered and strongly encouraged lots of trainings, pretty much anything you can think of. I worked with advocates and prosecutors that had decades of experience, and everyone was more than happy to help each other out. But unfortunately, as advocates, especially within a government agency, we don't typically receive any training or insight on how to deal with media attention, simply because it's not our wheelhouse. It's not an advocate's place to interact with or give a statement to a reporter or manage or coordinate any kind of interaction between survivors and the press. So, the advice that you hear and kind of what you think is common sense at the time is let the news cycle filter it out. It'll be over in a few days. But unfortunately, that wasn't what happened for one of the cases that I was working on. The family that I worked with, eventually at some point, they were just completely bombarded. They were receiving calls, texts, emails, surprise visits at their home, their place of work. Their, neighbors were contacted. The breaking point was when one of an extended relative was at the gym at an exercise class, and an international reporter had actually flown to the US, tracked this person down, now in a different state. So outside of Massachusetts, outside of the state that the family lives in, totally different state, found this extended relative and approached them for a comment when they were leaving their gym. So that was the moment where I had felt pretty useless, because I didn't have solid guidance to give to the family. But at that moment, that's when I was like, yep, I definitely need some help. So throughout this, I was complaining to a lot of my colleagues, not knowing what to do. And, eventually I spoke with, thankfully, one of my trusted colleagues still to this day. And she said, you need to speak to Dave Guarino. And I had never heard of Dave before. So I agreed to speak with Dave, but at that point I was pretty jaded, pretty apprehensive. I already did not have a positive opinion of the media, especially what I had seen already in district court and superior court and camera crews and arraignments, and it typically would leave a bad taste in my mouth. So when I decided to reach out to Dave, I was hesitant. I was fearful that I could potentially, welcome in an individual to the family's lives that could do more harm. I spoke with Dave quite a few times, vetted him pretty thoroughly. I received a few more positive references about him, and because of that, I eventually, approached the family with the idea of a pro bono family representative. So initially the family was on the fence, and it didn't take too long where they agreed to chat with Dave, spoke with Dave a few times. We all became pretty close. They were, able to turn their phones back on again and try to live a normal life, and to finally grieve in peace and have the privacy that they deserved. So we're still in touch to this day. The family is, happy that a resource like Survivors Say exists and can make a difference for other families and hopefully lead to some systemic change, which I see a lot of room for improvement on both sides. I think a trauma-informed approach when working with survivors is slowly gaining traction within journalism. And ideally, Survivors Say can help reporters, newsrooms learn a more humane way on how to approach survivors, handle with care, understand and respect the fact that they've experienced something traumatic, probably one of the worst moments in their entire lives that they'll ever have to experience. And on the other end, of course, for service providers, to be able to trust in the referral that they're giving to a survivor or a family of survivors that are dealing with being thrown into the media frenzy at one of the worst times in their life. And if the family isn't even open to that referral at that time, then to at least leave this webinar today with some tips on how to give guidance, so you don't have to have that useless or powerless feeling that I did when I had no clue how to best advise this family. And we will certainly go over a few of those recommendations later on in this webinar, but for now, I'm going to pass the mic back to Dave for the next slide. And Dave is going to tell us a little bit about some of the more specific cases that Survivors Say has worked on.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. And, thank you for all of your collaboration on this. One of the things I'll say that I hope this group will appreciate is that a lot of the folks that are naturally drawn to support and volunteer our work are people who have experiences like I do, working in the media, former newspaper reporters, former television reporters, PR people who are volunteering their time, and we're so grateful for all of them. But having someone like Nicole and with her background involved in our work and deeply involved in our work is so helpful, because she has lived experience and advocacy and survivor work that many of us don't have. And it's been really eye-opening, because she approaches, there's certain sort of things that PR people and media people assume are just self-evident about the media, how the media is going to behave. And Nicole does a great job of saying, well, why is that? Why can't you give questions to survivors first? Why can't you pool your coverage of a tragedy and not send 20 cameras to a family's house? So that's a very helpful perspective that we always lean on quite a bit. So thank you, Nicole. I want to spend some time talking about in specifics about our work, and then hopefully hear some more of your questions. At the National Center for Victims of Crime conference that was here in Boston last year, I went to a panel discussion about law enforcement and advocate response to mass trauma, and an FBI agent who had helped lead a law enforcement response to a mass shooting said, if you've worked on the response to one mass trauma incident, then you've worked on one mass trauma incident. And in many ways, I think the same applies to our work. In our experience, every survivor and survivor family is different. They have different perspectives, different challenges, different life experiences that impact if, when, and how they want to engage in storytelling and narrative telling. Every trauma is different. So naturally, if and how they choose to have us engage on their behalf is also different. By now, I hope you've seen that the gap in services is real, and I'd like to talk a bit about how we fill it. And I want to do that through the lens of a few of the survivors we've helped support, and again, just noting that with their informed consent as we share their stories. So you can go to the next slide. And I did this through photos of some of the folks. We've been honored to try to help their families and help tell their stories. Jacob Gallagher, Staff Sergeant, Air Force Staff Sergeant Jacob Gallagher on the top left of your screen, I believe, died on November 29th of last year with 7 other airmen when the Osprey aircraft they were flying in crashed off the coast of Japan. He was 24 at the time, married and has two children. At the time, they were 2 and just 7 weeks old. The referral came to us through a government leader who was aware of our work and knows our approach in not reaching out to any survivors or families when they're going through a tragedy. And so that leader was able to connect us directly with Jacob's parents, and we worked with them from, I believe, a day or so after the crash through to today. We worked with the family to start taking media calls, to returning media calls. We issued a statement on their behalf and managed the media side when Jacob's body was returned home in Western Massachusetts. And there was a long procession that the media covered the wake and the funeral, where the family wanted privacy and didn't want to speak to the media. And so we again issued statements on their behalf and managed the media so that they could be on site, as they will be anyway, but do it from a distance and be respectful from mourners who are coming. We also managed the one interview they did was with the Boston Globe. To the point Jason made earlier, that reporter approached them wanting to talk about Jacob's life and his legacy, and not as much about the issue that then developed from that, which is the safety of the Osprey aircraft. And the family was pleased with how that interview came out. And, we will see. I think that there may be a future point where they want to do some more media and talk, in a later date about safety and investigations and things of that nature. On your upper right is Tyler Lawrence, who was 13 years old when he was murdered, walking near his grandparents' home in Boston on a Sunday morning last January. We were connected with Tyler's mother in the immediate aftermath of that. She had already done some media. They came to her house, and she felt it was important to try to speak with them and talk about her son, and began the process of asking questions as to how this could have happened, and was deeply exposed in the middle of her trauma. And we started working with her, and were able to start taking some of the media calls. So they weren't, as soon as she was out there, then the media wanted more and wanted more. And so she actually had my cell phone number on her voicemail and said, if you're from the media, call Dave. And they did. One of the things that we find often is the media is happy to not, most media is happy to not be badgering families. They prefer to have this kind of more transactional relationship. We worked with the family through the memorial service, which the media was not invited to attend, but were there through the arrest of the individual charged in his homicide, the arraignment, and continued to issue statements on behalf of the family. And his mother has now done some more media since then, has become an advocate around gun violence and community violence issues, and we continue to stay in touch. The Estrella family on the bottom left, Miguel was 22 when he was shot and killed by a police officer in Pittsfield in March of 2022 while he was having a mental health crisis. And I wasn't involved with them in the initial aftermath. It was later when the district attorney's office was doing an investigation in the case in terms of whether police involved shooting and whether it was justified. And to the DA's credit, she and others knew that the family might need some support as that investigation wrapped up. And the district attorney connected me with the family, with their attorney, and we prepared, and the family participated actually in the district attorney's press conference when she announced the findings that the officers were not at fault. And the family obviously had some anger and some frustration at that, but were able to use that moment to air their concerns about the lack of police training in managing mental health crises and become a little bit more of an advocate as they wanted to do. And we've since done a Boston Globe story with them as well, about a year later, about police training. And last, Kate Price on the bottom right is an extraordinary person who's a survivor, human trafficking survivor. She's someone who I knew before doing any of this work, and she on her own, without any support from us, spent years working with a Boston Globe investigative reporter to tell her story. We helped her a bit as the story was coming out and preparing for other media that might follow from that. But even though, our involvement was a little less with her, we have worked with other sexual assault survivors and trafficking survivors. And I talk about her case, even though, she told her own story and did it on her own terms, but it's sort of the other side of what we do here at Survivors Say, where, it's one thing to be that shield that Jason talked about, or to manage the incoming when there's a crisis and there's an immediate, shocking, high-profile tragedy. But Kate and other survivors represent a group of folks who may decide on their own, or may want to talk to somebody about deciding on their own, to step forward and tell their story and want advice about how they do that and whether they should do that and what might happen if they do that, and then draw the media to their story if that's what they want, to advocate on behalf of an issue, or to do something deeper. Next slide, please, Stephanie. And so how do we do that? You've heard a lot of this, but I wanted to dig into the details a little bit more. We have teams of folks who are dispatched to help families and survivors as needed. We have individuals who comprise those teams. We try to pair people based on life experience that we have. We have many survivors who are part of our network, who volunteer and want to get involved, particularly when there's someone who's gone through something similar to what they have gone through. We connect with survivor families through referrals. As I mentioned, we don't do direct outreach to families for a very specific reason. I was that reporter knocking on people's doors after the worst moments of their lives. And we know that alone impacts and has trauma that comes from that. So we don't want to be the folks who are doing that, but it makes it critical that we have trusted referral sources, like law enforcement, like healthcare providers, religious leaders, community-based organizations who can refer us in and build that relationship of trust that's so important as we get started. As Nicole talked about, taking the time to really build that rapport, to build the trust, and make sure the family knows that they have the control in this relationship, that nothing will be said on their behalf without their support, without their approval, and everything we do is through that lens. As we talked a little bit about, we are involved heavily, often in the immediate aftermath of a tragedy, through vigils, arraignments, trials, anniversaries, and it's always the family's decision, how involved we get. With their permission, some of the things that we do specifically is we monitor the media for them so they don't have to pay attention to it. And if they don't want to, and raise issues that could be factually incorrect, and say, do you want us to go talk to this media and fix this? Here's a story that you might want to get involved in if it's something that might be favorable or something they want to acknowledge. We engage with the media on their behalf, acting as their spokesperson if necessary. We often act on their behalf off the record with media, asking them to address their coverage, to not use this photo of the person, but this photo, which the family would prefer. We ensure that all calls, visits, and requests come through our teams. We ask the media in everything we do, please respect the privacy of the family. Please call us day or night. We're available for that reason. And we provide background information to the media if the family chooses, so that they can get it right, as Jason talked about. We change photos, as I mentioned, releasing statements, crafting commentary, things like that, managing press interviews, all the basics of communications. And important to say, we really work to make sure the family has, and the survivors have very few surprises while they're going through this. That there's a clear roadmap based on our experience of here's what the media is typically going to do. We're not perfect. We sometimes say the media will go here or won't go here, and we're wrong. But based on our years of experience, we're right more than we're wrong, and I think we can give the families that we work with some pretty clear guidance on what to expect, because they might not know that at a funeral parlor that the media is going to be hanging out outside, and to warn people not to talk to reporters unless they want to be featured. And as we said earlier, we stay with the family and the survivors for as long as they need us. And we're glad that continues to be the case. Next slide, please. Unless, Brenda, feel free to jump in at any time. Unless there's questions, I'm going to throw this to Nicole, who can talk about defining the support that we provide.
No questions yet.
Great.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Brenna. So I think we have a good 50-50 in the audience today. Folks that work in the communications world and folks that work in that are service providers. So this piece here, how to actually define the support that survivors say is offering. It's very important to me because for the folks that are service providers and just like me do not have a background in communications, I didn't understand this. I don't know what goes into an interview or coordinating an interview or fielding calls or knocking on someone's door. I don't get that. So it wasn't until my involvement with Survivors Say that I had a much better understanding. So I wanted to go over a few things for the service providers for two reasons. One, so you can trust the resource you're potentially making a referral to one day. And so you can properly explain it. You can tell the survivor or the surviving family exactly what they can expect from Survivors Say. And if they're not interested, that's fine. Like I said, you will be leaving here with tips today as well. But so how do we define support? What does Survivors Say actually do? So we establish trust, we plan in advance, maintain ongoing consent, very important, and we are transparent. So establishing trust, what do you want to say? How do you want to say it, if at all? A little bit of what I'm going over here seems like it's when the survivor wants to speak out or share their story. In no way is that a requirement or ever expected of any of the survivors that are connected with Survivors Say. But making sure the survivor is in control of their story at all times. Which topics should be avoided, making sure that there's a safe zone and an unsafe zone that's discussed prior to any conversations with the media, like I said, if that conversation ever takes place. How does the survivor want to be identified? Very important, presence of having a support person. You want to make sure that there is a person that the survivor knows well and trusts that is present if there are any conversations or requests for comments that are provided or answered to, that can be with the survivor. And also you want to make sure that these phone calls or these potentially recorded interviews are taking place in a neutral and comfortable environment for the survivor. Planning in advance, mutually agreed upon questions. Like I said, safe zones and unsafe zones, you need to know what's off limits and what's on limits. Dave mentioned, providing preferred pictures in advance and making sure that certain pictures are not used at all. Scheduling a time that allows the survivor to decompress after any of these difficult conversations. preferably the survivor does not have to go to work after this tough conversation. Even better if their support person is free after this conversation. Anything is doable. It's revolving around the survivor's schedule, feelings, story. It will need to be scheduled properly so the survivor can take some time for themselves after this conversation. Ongoing consent. Letting the survivor know it's always okay to take a break or end the discussion at any point. Determining a word or hand signal for a survivor, say volunteer, to step in need be during any difficult conversation or interaction. And I think we've all worked with a wide range of personalities. There are some people that are very happy to speak up for themselves, and it's no problem for them to end a conversation and walk away need be. Other individuals are, they don't want to disappoint someone, or they don't want to make someone mad. And either way, it should be standard to have that discussion beforehand, to let the survivor know, hey, I have no problem inserting myself at any point in time if you need a break. So let's pick a word or pick a hand signal, and I'll make sure that we'll bring this to a pause immediately. Transparency. So, we have our set of questions ready and agreed upon, but sometimes these questions change just due to the flow of the conversation. Full transparency with that is that there shouldn't be any curveballs. I mean, the questions might not be word for word, and maybe that will throw someone, and rightfully so, but no topics that are considered off limits. When and where will this be published? That's very important. And to flag the fact that other platforms, news stations, on social media, podcasts, wherever, might pick up the story, your comment, and will probably be shared elsewhere online, especially. And lastly, explaining, or at least flagging well in advance, that there's a good chance they will feel a wide range of emotions after seeing themselves on TV or hearing their own voice on the radio, reading their story online. And then it's likely that their own loved ones will also feel this wide range of emotions. This is part of the conversation that happens up front, like, what do you want out of these services? Is it privacy? Did you want to share your experience? Did you want to share your loved one's story? So this is a conversation that's had early on to make sure everyone involved is prepared and the survivor's making an informed decision, and that they know they can stop, pause, or leave the conversation at any point in time. So I wanted to go over that just to make sure that the people that don't have any involvement with the communications world understands that those are a few examples of the specifics of what Survivors Say does. But I want to pass it back to Dave for the next slide, please. And Dave will go over a few tips that you can share with the survivors that you're working with.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. So just building on that a little bit, some practical things that folks can take with them. There's a lot of resources, and folks should feel free to contact us at any time. We're happy to share those, but wanted to leave you with some quick things that can, for folks that want to help families, or families that want to proceed on their own in these environments. Selecting a point person to manage inquiries from the media as soon as possible, particularly in a high profile moment, is so important, so that the individual family members, the survivors, aren't managing it themselves. Even if you have support like Survivors Say, or some other volunteer or person who's going to help you, it's our belief that survivors and families should have one point person to be the family liaison, if possible. Jason and I spoke, but day to day in those critical early moments, he had asked a family friend and a relative to kind of work with me and be the point people, and then they filtered it further before it went to Jason. And I was fine with that as long as I knew when it mattered what I was hearing was coming from the family. And it just gave them the sense of, well, he doesn't even need to be bothered by all the things you're hearing from the media, Dave. And I think that that's really helpful. As I said earlier, the media prefers that too. I can't tell you how many times we've been involved in these moments, and the media says, oh, good. A lot of times if they know us in particular, oh, good, you know, I don't have to feel bad going to knock on that family's door. It can be a little bit more transactional because they know that I'm there serving the family, and I won't lie to them, and I'll be direct with them, but I'll also be honest about what the family's going to be doing and saying. Social media is just gargantuan in everything that happens now. As soon as there's a tragedy, the first place the family will look is social media. Typically, they ask permission before they use anything, but sometimes they don't. And there's lots of air quote media outlets out there these days that are, in my opinion, oftentimes just glorified local bloggers who act like journalists, and they don't always follow the same code of conduct that the media follows when it's behaving, and they won't necessarily ask for permission. So if you're worried about that stuff, asking somebody if you don't know how to do it, but locking down your social media, at least temporarily, and making sure that the only stuff that's readily available through that is stuff that you want to be out there. And watch out for GoFundMe. There was just a family that we were supporting last week that didn't really want to be engaging with the media, and one of the family members put up a GoFundMe site to collect money for funeral expenses that they couldn't afford, and they put a photo of their loved one who had died tragically on the GoFundMe page, and the media used it, and it was on the front page of the Boston Globe. And the media considers that fair use, unlike social media sites where they'll say, it's on Dave's page, so I should at least ask him for permission. They feel like GoFundMe is a public thing, so they'll take it and use it. They'll credit GoFundMe, but they'll go ahead and use it. If you're doing proactive outreach, if you want to talk to the media, collecting any photos or narrative items that might be helpful for distribution, tell the story that you want told if you're going to tell it. The media in these moments, sometimes they're fleeting, but they are a captive audience, and they will report on the things that they hear from family members, from loved ones. And so talking about things like the volunteer work that Jason and Rhonda did after tragedies, talking about her love for different aspects of her life. The media will report that, and to the extent that it matters to family members, that's the legacy that can be left behind. In my opinion, much more so than merely the tragedy that came. And think about, any members of the family, friends, neighbors, coaches, teachers, etc., who might like to speak to the media with a little bit of support from you, with a little bit of guidance on things they should say and talk about. That can be helpful, even if you don't want to, or the survivors themselves don't want to. Talking to others who could, make sure that positive side is portrayed in the media. And frankly, those who don't. One of the things that we've seen in our work is when there are media stories and survivors, pick up the newspaper or watch the newscast and say, oh, they talked to that person. And that's a very real human emotion. And if there's folks that you'd prefer are not out there, things can be done. You can also make sure that there are folks out there that you do want to be speaking to the media. Next slide, please. And I think this is our last slide before we get into thank yous and discussions. And so as we've talked a lot about, we think we've identified a real critical gap in services. And so we're eager to expand our work on a daily, hourly basis. And so, we're spending a lot of time trying to do that. As we've talked about, we recruited a bunch of volunteers. We're here in front of this group because we really want to partner with you. So please do contact us at any time if you think that there's anyone we can help, even to have a conversation. Sometimes just talking to someone who understands how the media can work is helpful to families. There's still a lack of awareness about the gap that exists. So please join us in talking about that. If we're being honest, there's skepticism, some of it understandable, about, among those who are already serving survivors and victims. We work to address that skepticism head on and make sure those who are serving survivors and their families, especially who are investigating and prosecuting on behalf of survivors, know that we're here to support, that our goal is to share the survivor's story of their loved one, of their healing journey, and not to share details about the case or anything that might be negatively impacting the case. And we have plenty of examples to share of, homicide detectives, victim witness advocates, and others who came in very skeptical and were assuming that we were media people who were suddenly going to project all the details of the case out to the media. And those who've worked with us know that that's not what we do. We're focused on doing more and being a resource for marginalized communities. I said it at the outset. I want to make sure we close with that, particularly those who are disproportionately impacted by violence, but also are often left even more unsupported and are negatively portrayed in the media. That's something that I had a conversation yesterday with a survivor of Harvey Weinstein, who was saying that she and others have been so blessed to have support because they're people, she's saying people of means who can get support around them. And so that makes her, because she was referring a case to us, and others, all the more committed to making sure that we are representing folks who truly need our support and are too often left without the support they need when the media comes calling. And the sort of bloggers that I mentioned are out there, and they don't follow the same rules. And so we really are committed to trying to change that paradigm with the media and make sure we do education on that side too. As a former reporter, I can say one of the things reporters like least is being told how to do their job, but I think that they are human beings. They know the trauma that they can bring to families in these moments, and they are open to new and different ways of doing things. And they are willing to share things like questions, deadlines, focus, setting up interviews where you want, doing all of that. So the last thing I'll say is that we're spending a lot of time on training, making sure even those of us who are communicators are trauma-informed communicators, and there is a huge difference. And so we've done a lot of trainings of late and making sure that anyone who's going out and supported families is fully trained. We're a volunteer-based, volunteer-led organization, so I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we rely on donations and support to support our work. It's mostly volunteer, it's all volunteer time. And so just convincing people to spend their time is one thing, but you heard about cases in Pittsfield and other parts of the country where we need to send people and travel some distance and stay overnight. We want this to be a full-time operation so we can serve as many families as we can. So we are also spending some time trying to grow our reach and expand our services. So I will stop there. I think the last slide is just opening up to discussion. I know, Brenna, you've been great at managing it for us. So if there's any other questions, we're here to answer them.
Thank you, Dave. We did have a question that just came in. Given you are volunteer-based, how many people is Survivor Say equipped to support at a time?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't know if it was 8 or 10 years ago when I first sort of had this idea, and I met with Liam Lowney from MOVA. He said, he did some research and he said, there's nothing like this that he can find that exists, and we haven't found anything like it that exists. And he said, you're going to be flooded with calls. And I said, well, that sounds like a good reason to start a nonprofit. We have not been flooded with calls, and I think that the challenge is because people don't necessarily know that the gap exists, and the sort of skepticism that I talked about and the reluctance that Nicole went through, even as the media was kind of staking out relatively distant family members in that case. She wasn't sure if it was the right thing. All very understandable, but we have to get through those hurdles and make sure that we are aware, so folks can refer us at the key time. To answer the question, typically we work on 1 or 2 cases per month at the moment. I think, but we have 40 volunteers who honestly, I want to be able to engage more frequently. So, we have bandwidth to do more. One of the first conversations we have, though, is do we have the bandwidth to truly support this family? And we'll be honest, if we don't. All of our volunteers have day jobs and conflicts and families. So we over analyze that and make sure that we don't get involved with a family unless we have the bandwidth to support them from that point on.
Thanks, Dave. And a follow-up to that came in. How do you recruit volunteers? And what does training look like? Do you all provide training to your volunteers?
Sure. It's mostly word of mouth on volunteers. We know a lot of folks who are in our industry and have some experience working on crisis communications and in the media. We have had people who come to us and want to volunteer. There's been a couple media stories that I showed earlier, and some folks came out of that. But before they get involved directly with any family member, they go through training that we provide in terms of sort of a checklist of things that we articulate to family members. Every case that we've worked on so far has had myself or others involved that have already been involved with families and have some experience in this. And then we've been doing some trainings, specific trauma training in the last year with organizations that help us understand the impacts of trauma and overlay that with our communications work to make sure that people are prepared when they go in.
Another follow-up, and if I'm not understanding this question correctly, to whoever sent it in, feel free to follow up. Do you hope to see this extend beyond state support? So I think you had touched on how you have volunteers outside of Massachusetts, and how do you go about managing beyond the state of Massachusetts?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the answer is yes. What we wanted to do was prove the concept here in Massachusetts, where we live, where I worked in the media and have a lot of contacts, and then see where we can go from there. I think we still have work to do in Massachusetts and make sure that we're doing all that we can do and being accessible to families. But there have been cases that have come up outside of Massachusetts where we've helped. We were called on and brought in to support some of those who were helping families after the Lewiston shooting, after the Buffalo shooting. There was a missing hiker in southwestern Colorado whose family happened to know somebody who's a volunteer on our team, and we got connected with the family, and we helped his sisters navigate the media, and we didn't even get involved. That's a good example. We didn't actually do any outreach to the media, but the sisters, who were very savvy, just wanted to gut check what they were doing and see if they were handling things right. So there have been moments outside of Massachusetts, and we have some partnerships that we're building with folks in the western part of the country who've done similar work. and an individual, former crime reporter in Canada, who's doing some work and shining the spotlight on this work. So we're building a network of folks around the world who can jump in if needed.
Thanks, Dave. That's great to hear. Not seeing any other questions come in, but we do have 5 minutes left. I welcome questions in the next 5 minutes, but to kind of fill the silence that could exist, I will just thank our panelists for being with us today. Dave, we really appreciate your survivor-centered and trauma-informed approach to this work. And Nicole, thanks to you for reinforcing that survivor-centered approach and bringing your experience as an advocate to this work. And of course, Jason, thank you for lending your voice to our work and sharing you and your family's experience. We really appreciate you all for being here today. We did get another question as I was giving my thank yous. And it started as a thank you to you all from one of our audience members. As an organization, how can people not currently associate with the organization best support your work?
My gosh, reach out. I will absolutely put you to work as a volunteer, no matter what your skill set. But I think, the most important things for us were sort of where I ended, being aware and making sure that folks know that there is this gap in services. And when you see something, make sure to tell families, to tell survivors, to tell folks who they're in touch with that there is support out there for them if they need it, and that we're happy to help. If you know folks who might be willing to volunteer time, even if they're not communications folks, we have plenty of activities that we need folks to support. Those are the most important things. And beyond that, I sort of started with this in terms of the world change that I think can come of this, is being astute observers of the media and how they cover these stories, and not being shy about telling them, making sure that they respond to what people read, what people say to their stories, and how they interact with the news business, which is really sort of broken in many respects right now. And so, responding to reporters who write stories that aren't survivor focused or survivor centered. I'm the Weinstein story is fresh in my mind because I talked to a survivor about it yesterday and again today, and she's just really bothered that the coverage has been all these pundits and journalists talking about the sort of legal minutia and whether or not he's going to get out, and it's not survivor centered. And so saying something around that and speaking up wherever you find yourself is important. But Jason, Nicole, please jump in, as I'm sure I missed a bunch of stuff that folks can do.
No, I thought that was great, Dave. Thank you, especially speaking up when a piece of writing is not survivor centered. I think I had said earlier when we were talking about systemic change in the family that we worked with, to hope that newsrooms are actually turning a point and acting in a more trauma-informed way.
Amen. Amen. But thank you. I know we're at time, but Brenna, MOVA, all of you who came, thank you for all the work that you do, that you've always done, and we're just glad to be a part of this network. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about our work. And Jason, Nicole, I'm so grateful for both of you.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, and thank you, Brenna. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, everyone. And I will just say to the audience, we have recorded this session. It will be available to you all early next week. Dave's email is currently on the screen, but if he says it's okay, we can include it in that follow-up email as well. So you all will have direct access to to Dave for further questions if you have them. We're getting some thank yous in the chat, and I'll echo that again. I'm sounding like a broken record, but thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to our ASL interpreters for helping us make this webinar accessible, and to our CART provider. And thanks to our audience for being here with us today and throughout the entire month of April. I encourage all of you to visit our YouTube channel to see what went on this month. There's a whole bunch of recordings that are totally free to you all, and it's an opportunity to learn from so many of our fantastic colleagues. So thank you all again, and thanks to our audience. We are right on time. So with that, I will let you all go. Have a
Great.
great day.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.